I worked 4 jobs to pay off my wife's debts. One night, I overheard her laughing with her friends, calling me her personal doormat, and bragging that she spent my money on another man. The next morning, I prepared a surprise that would make her wish she'd never laughed at me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Dennis, and I'm 59 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been working 4 jobs just to keep my head above water. Every morning at 4:30, I wake up to start my shift at the warehouse. By 2 in the afternoon, I'm driving across town to my second job at the hardware store. Evenings find me stocking shelves at the grocery store, and weekends I spend doing handyman work for neighbors. I'm exhausted every single day, but I tell myself it's worth it because I'm helping my wife Ashley get back on her feet. Ashley is 42, 17 years younger than me, and when we married 8 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. She was beautiful, charming, and she made me feel like I could conquer the world. But somewhere along the way, things changed. She started having what she called financial emergencies. Her car needed repairs, her credit cards had unexpected charges, her sister needed help with medical bills. Each time I stepped up, each time I took on another job, worked longer hours, sacrificed a little more of myself. Last Tuesday night, I dragged myself home after a 14-hour day. My back was screaming, my hands were raw from lifting boxes, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But as I walked up to our front door, I heard laughter coming from inside. Ashley was having her weekly girls' night with her friends Melissa and Karen. I almost walked right in, but something in the tone of their voices made me pause. "Oh my God, you're so bad," Melissa was saying between giggles. "I can't believe he actually bought the whole story about your car transmission," Karen added. "How much did you say that cost again?" My hand froze on the doorknob. Car transmission? Ashley had told me last month that her transmission needed to be rebuilt, and I'd given her $2,800 for it. I'd worked 3 straight weekends of overtime to earn that money. $2,800, Ashley said, and I could hear the smugness in her voice. The poor man nearly cried when I told him. He actually asked if there was any way to get it done cheaper. The 3 of them burst into laughter again. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I stayed frozen where I was, listening. "And where did that money really go?" Melissa asked in a sing-song voice. "Vegas weekend with Ryan, of course," Ashley replied. "God, you should have seen the suite he booked. Floor-to-ceiling windows, champagne service, the works. We spent the whole weekend ordering room service and, well, let's just say we barely left the bed." My legs felt weak. Ryan. I knew Ryan. He was Ashley's friend from work, someone she mentioned occasionally. I'd even met him once at a company barbecue. He'd shaken my hand and complimented me on what a lucky guy I was to have Ashley. "You're terrible," Karen said, but she was laughing. "How do you keep a straight face when you ask him for money?" "It's easy," Ashley said, and her voice took on a colder tone. "Dennis is like a trained dog. I just have to look sad and mention some crisis, and he practically throws money at me. The man has no backbone whatsoever." I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it through the wood. "But doesn't he ever ask questions?" Melissa wondered. "I mean, 4 jobs, Dennis? That seems excessive." "That's the beauty of it," Ashley continued. "He's so desperate to be the provider, the hero, that he never questions anything. He just works harder and harder, thinking he's being this amazing husband. It's actually kind of pathetic when you think about it." "You're using your own husband as a personal ATM," Karen said. "Doesn't that ever bother you?" There was a pause, and when Ashley spoke again, her voice was matter-of-fact. "Look, I never pretended to marry him for love. Dennis was stable, financially secure, and completely devoted to me. I was 24 and broke. It seemed like a good arrangement at the time." "And now?" Melissa asked. "Now I'm having the time of my life," Ashley said. "Ryan treats me like a queen, takes me to all the places Dennis could never afford even when he was making good money. And the best part? Dennis is paying for all of it. He's like my personal doormat, and he doesn't even know it." The 3 of them dissolved into laughter again. I heard the clink of wine glasses, heard Ashley say something about how she'd convinced me just last week that she needed $1,500 for unexpected dental work. I remembered that conversation. I'd been so worried about her, had offered to take time off work to drive her to the dentist. She'd insisted she could handle it alone, that I should focus on work since money was tight. I'd felt guilty for weeks that I couldn't afford better dental insurance for her. Standing there on my own front porch, listening to my wife mock me to her friends, I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered. Something deeper than that. My sense of self, my understanding of my own life, my belief that the suffering and exhaustion of the past 3 years had been for something meaningful. I quietly backed away from the door and sat in my truck for 2 hours, just staring at nothing. When I finally went inside, the house was dark and Ashley was already in bed. She stirred when I slipped under the covers. "Hey, baby," she murmured sleepily. "How was work?" "Fine," I whispered back. "I missed you," she said, rolling over to kiss my cheek. The same lips that had been laughing at me just hours before. "I love you so much, Dennis. I don't know what I'd do without you." I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The woman lying next to me, breathing peacefully, had been playing me for a fool for years. Every sacrifice I'd made, every extra hour I'd worked, every time I'd chosen overtime over rest because she needed something, it had all been a lie. But what haunted me most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how easily she'd done it, how naturally the lies had come to her. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake she'd regretted. This was calculated, deliberate, and she was enjoying every minute of it. As the sun started to rise, I made a decision. Ashley thought she was married to a doormat, someone too weak and devoted to ever fight back. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. The days following that devastating night passed in a strange haze. I went through the motions of my routine: warehouse at dawn, hardware store in the afternoon, grocery store in the evening, but everything felt different. I was watching my own life from the outside, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. Ashley carried on as if nothing had changed. She was the same affectionate wife she'd always been, greeting me with kisses when I came home, asking about my day, making small talk over dinner. But now I heard the performance in it. I saw how her eyes would glaze over when I talked about work, how she'd change the subject if I mentioned being tired. I realized she'd been acting this entire time, and I'd been too blind to see it. 3 days after overhearing that conversation, I made my first move. During my lunch break at the hardware store, I drove to our bank instead of eating. I'd never really paid close attention to our joint account statements before. I just deposited my paychecks and trusted Ashley to handle the household expenses. Now I sat in the parking lot with 6 months of statements spread across my dashboard, and what I found made my hands shake. The dental work that had supposedly cost $1,500, there was no charge to any dental office. Instead, there was a cash withdrawal for that exact amount on the same day Ashley said she'd had the procedure. The car transmission repair? No payment to any auto shop, but there were charges to hotels, restaurants, and what looked like spa services in Las Vegas. During the weekend, Ashley said she was visiting her sick aunt. I went back further, pulling up statements from the past 2 years on my phone. The pattern was everywhere once I knew what to look for. Ashley would tell me about some crisis, I'd transfer money or give her cash, and within days that money would be spent on luxuries or mysterious cash withdrawals. My wife hadn't had a single legitimate emergency in over 2 years. That evening, I watched Ashley differently. She made dinner and chatted about her day at the insurance office where she worked part-time. She mentioned that her friend Karen was going through a rough divorce, how sad it was when people couldn't make their marriages work. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. "You're quiet tonight," she said, settling beside me on the couch. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said. It wasn't a lie. I was exhausted, but not from work anymore. I was tired of being played for a fool. She snuggled closer to me, her head on my shoulder. "You work so hard for us, baby. I know it's not easy, but things will get better soon. I'm hoping for a promotion at work, and then maybe you won't have to kill yourself with all these jobs." The promotion story was new, but I recognized the script. Give me hope, keep me motivated, make me believe the sacrifice was temporary. I wondered how many times she'd used variations of this speech over the years. "That would be nice," I said quietly. "I love you so much, Dennis," she whispered. "I know I don't say it enough, but you're my hero. The way you take care of me, provide for me. I'm the luckiest woman in the world." I closed my eyes and let her words wash over me. Each one felt like a small knife, cutting away the last remnants of the man I used to be. The man who would have melted at those words, who would have worked even harder to deserve them. The next day, I took an extended lunch break and drove to Ashley's office. I told myself I was just checking, maybe hoping I'd misunderstood something. But when I asked the receptionist if I could speak with my wife, she looked confused. "Ashley Hartwell," she said. "I'm sorry, but Ashley only works here 2 days a week. She's not in today." 2 days a week. Ashley had been telling me she worked part-time, but I'd assumed that meant at least 20 hours. 2 days a week was maybe 16 hours total. I thought about all the times she'd said she couldn't take on more hours because they weren't available. How she'd been trying to get promoted to full-time for years. "Do you know if she's been looking for additional work elsewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The woman smiled sympathetically. "Oh, I doubt it. Ashley's always talking about how she doesn't need to work more because her husband takes care of everything. She says she's living the dream, living the dream. While I worked 70 hours a week, my wife was living the dream." I drove back to the hardware store in a daze. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Missing you today. Can't wait to see you tonight. Making your favorite dinner. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Love you too." That evening, Ashley did make my favorite dinner, pot roast with all the fixings. She'd even bought a bottle of wine, which we rarely had anymore because I'd told her we needed to watch our spending. She was in a particularly good mood, talking animatedly about her day off, how she'd spent it organizing the house and running errands. "I'm sorry I spend so much," she said suddenly over dessert. "I know money's tight with all my problems lately. I promise I'm trying to be more careful." The apology felt rehearsed, like she'd been planning it. I wondered if this was part of her routine, spend my money, then offer a token apology to keep me feeling like she was aware of our situation. "What kind of errands did you run today?" I asked casually. "Oh, just boring stuff. Grocery store, bank, had to stop by the library to return some books." She smiled at me. "Nothing exciting." I nodded, but made a mental note. Tomorrow I would check if there were any charges on our account from today. I was starting to understand that everything Ashley told me needed to be verified. After dinner, she insisted on doing the dishes while I relaxed. As I sat in the living room, I could hear her humming in the kitchen, happy and carefree. For 8 years, I'd loved that sound. It had made me feel like I was providing not just financial security, but genuine happiness for the woman I loved. Now I realized she was humming because she'd successfully extracted another day's worth of free living from her personal ATM. She was happy because her scam was working perfectly. That night, after Ashley fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and went to the garage. Hidden behind some old paint cans, I started a file folder. Bank statements, printed emails, receipts, anything that documented the lies. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with the evidence, but I knew I needed to have it. As I organized the papers by date, I started to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just random theft or impulse spending. Ashley had been systematically extracting money from me for years, and the amounts were getting larger. What started as a few $100s here and there had escalated to thousands. In the past 6 months alone, she'd taken over $8,000 under false pretenses. $8,000. That was more than I made in some months after taxes. Money I'd earned loading trucks at 4 in the morning, standing on my feet for 10-hour shifts, working weekends when my body was screaming for rest. I thought about Ryan, Ashley's lover, enjoying Vegas suites and room service paid for with my labor. I thought about Ashley laughing with her friends, calling me pathetic, planning her next lie. I thought about all the times I'd apologized to her for not being able to provide more, while she was secretly living better than we could afford. Sitting in that garage at 2 in the morning, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. For the first time since overhearing that conversation, I wasn't confused or heartbroken. I was angry, and anger was something I could work with. Ashley thought she was married to a weak man, someone she could manipulate indefinitely. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated what happens when a patient man finally reaches his limit. 2 weeks into my investigation, I discovered something that shook me even more than the financial betrayal. Ashley wasn't working alone. The network of lies extended far beyond just her and Ryan. It included people I'd trusted, people who had sat at my dinner table and smiled to my face while knowing exactly what was happening. It started when I decided to follow up on one of Ashley's most recent emergencies. 3 weeks ago, she'd come to me in tears, explaining that her sister Monica was facing eviction and needed $2,000 immediately. I'd given her the money without question, just like always. But when I checked our bank records, there was no wire transfer, no check written to Monica, just another cash withdrawal. On Saturday afternoon, while Ashley was supposedly at the grocery store, I drove to Monica's apartment complex. I'd only been there once before for a birthday party last year, but I remembered the way. When Monica answered the door, she looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Dennis, what brings you by?" "I wanted to check on you," I said carefully. "Ashley told me you were having some financial troubles." Monica's expression shifted to confusion. "Financial troubles? No, everything's been fine. Actually, things have been really good lately. I got that promotion at the hospital, remember?" Ashley was so excited when I told her. I felt that familiar cold feeling in my stomach. "When did you tell her about the promotion?" "Oh, about a month ago." "Why? Is everything okay?" "A month ago. Right around the time Ashley had come to me crying about Monica's supposed eviction notice. I made some excuse about mixed messages and left quickly, but my mind was racing. Ashley hadn't just lied about Monica needing money. She'd deliberately used Monica's good news as cover for her lie. That evening, I watched Ashley unpack groceries and chatter about her day. She mentioned running into an old friend at the store, complained about the long lines, showed me the receipts to prove she'd stayed within our tight grocery budget. Every word was calculated to reinforce the image of a frugal, responsible wife who only took money from me when absolutely necessary. "How's Monica doing?" I asked casually while helping put away canned goods. "Oh, you know Monica," Ashley said with a sigh. "Still struggling, but she's proud. She won't admit when she needs help." The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost admired the skill of it. If I hadn't visited Monica myself, I would have believed every word. Monday morning, I made another discovery that changed everything. During my break at the warehouse, I called Ashley's friend Karen. I'd been thinking about that night I'd overheard them talking, remembering how comfortable Karen had seemed with Ashley's deception. I wondered if Karen might know more than she'd let on. "Hi, Karen. It's Dennis," I said when she answered. "I hope I'm not bothering you at work." "Oh, hi, Dennis. No, it's fine. Is everything okay? I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm trying to plan a surprise for Ashley, but I need to know her schedule. Do you know if she has any plans this Thursday afternoon?" There was a pause. "Thursday? Well, she mentioned something about meeting Ryan for lunch, but I thought, wait, is this for the surprise?" My blood went cold. "Ryan?" "Yeah, you know, from her work. They've been." Another pause, longer this time. "Dennis, you do know about their lunch meetings, right?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure I had the timing right." "Oh, good. I was worried for a second. Ashley said you were totally fine with their friendship, but sometimes men can get weird about these things, you know." After I hung up, I sat in my truck for 10 minutes trying to process what I'd just learned. Karen wasn't just aware of Ashley's deception, she was actively helping to cover it up. She was monitoring my reactions, making sure I stayed in line with the story they'd all agreed upon. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Instead of going to my second job at the hardware store, I called in sick and decided to see exactly what Ashley did on her days off. I parked across the street from our house and waited. At 11:30, Ashley came out wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something expensive looking in a deep blue that complemented her eyes perfectly. She got into her car and drove toward downtown. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding. She pulled into the parking lot of Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant I'd driven past hundreds of times but never imagined being able to afford. Through the window, I watched her walk inside and immediately embrace a man I recognized as Ryan. He kissed her cheek, then her lips, and led her to a table by the window. I sat in my truck across the street and watched my wife have lunch with her lover. They held hands across the table, fed each other bites of food, laughed like they were the only two people in the world. Ashley looked radiant, more alive and happy than I'd seen her in years. Certainly happier than she looked when she was with me. The lunch lasted 2 hours. Afterward, Ryan walked Ashley to her car, kissed her goodbye, and handed her what looked like a small gift box. She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him again, then got in her car and drove home. I waited another hour before heading home myself. When I walked through the door, Ashley was in the kitchen, back in her regular clothes, preparing dinner like she'd been there all afternoon. "Hey, baby," she said, kissing my cheek. "How was work?" "Fine," I said. "How was your day?" "Boring," she replied with a laugh. "Just cleaned the house, did some laundry, watched a little TV. I swear, sometimes I think I'm getting old. I actually took a nap this afternoon." I nodded and went to change clothes, but my mind was reeling. The casual nature of her lies was breathtaking. She wasn't nervous or guilty. She was completely comfortable deceiving me about how she spent every minute of her day. That evening, I called Melissa, Ashley's other friend from that girl's night. I used the same story about planning a surprise, hoping to learn more about how deep this conspiracy went. "Oh, Dennis, that's so sweet," Melissa gushed. Ashley is so lucky to have you. You're always doing thoughtful things for her. I try, I said. I just want to make sure I don't interfere with any plans she might have. Has she mentioned anything special coming up? Well, there's her weekend trip next month, but I'm sure you know about that already. Weekend trip. Ashley hadn't mentioned any weekend trip to me. Of course, I just want to make sure I have the dates right. The 15th and 16th, I think. She's so excited about the spa package. She said Ryan really went all out this time. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. A spa weekend with Ryan, planned for next month, that I was apparently supposed to pay for without even knowing it existed. I thought about how Ashley would probably approach me in a few weeks with some story about needing money for a family emergency or medical procedure, while she was actually planning a romantic getaway with her lover. But what disturbed me most was how casually Melissa had mentioned it, assuming I already knew. These women weren't just keeping Ashley's secret. They were operating under the assumption that I was somehow okay with being cuckolded and financially exploited. They thought I was such a pathetic doormat that I would knowingly fund my wife's affair. That night, after Ashley fell asleep, I added everything to my growing file. The lunch at Marcello's, the lies about Monica, the planned spa weekend, the casual way her friends discussed my humiliation. I was starting to see the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't just an affair. And it wasn't just financial fraud. It was a systematic destruction of my dignity, orchestrated by multiple people who viewed me as nothing more than a useful fool. They had turned my love for Ashley into a weapon against me, using my devotion to fund their entertainment. As I organized the evidence, I realized something else. Ashley's friends weren't just enablers, they were active participants. They helped create alibis, they monitored my suspicions, they even seemed to enjoy the game. To them, I wasn't a person being wronged. I was a character in their story, a convenient plot device that made Ashley's double life possible. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, had spent years turning me into a joke shared among her friends. But as I sat there in the garage, surrounded by proof of their betrayal, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt was crystallizing into something harder, something more focused. They thought they knew Dennis the doormat, Dennis the fool, Dennis the man too weak to fight back. They had no idea who they were really dealing with, and they were about to find out that some mistakes can't be undone. 3 weeks after discovering the full extent of Ashley's network of deception, I was ready to begin my counterattack. But unlike my wife, I wasn't going to be reckless or emotional. I was going to be methodical, strategic, and most importantly, completely invisible until the moment I chose to reveal myself. The first step was protecting my assets. Ashley had access to our joint checking account, but I'd been quietly moving money into a separate savings account she didn't know about. Every week I deposited my paychecks as usual, but then transferred portions to my hidden account. To Ashley, it would look like our expenses were simply higher, nothing suspicious enough to trigger questions. I also opened a safety deposit box at a different bank across town. Inside, I stored copies of all the evidence I'd gathered: bank statements, photographs, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of Ashley's lies. If something happened to my garage files, I'd still have everything I needed. The second step was legal preparation. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney named Patricia Moss, someone who specialized in complex financial cases. I told her I was exploring options but wasn't ready to file anything yet. I just wanted to understand my rights and what evidence I would need. Patricia was a sharp woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes in a leather portfolio. "How long has this been going on?" she asked when I finished. "At least 3 years that I can prove, probably longer." She nodded. "And you have documentation of the false emergencies?" "Bank records, contradictory evidence, even recordings of her friends discussing it." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Dennis, what you're describing goes beyond simple adultery. This is systematic financial fraud. In many cases, we can recover assets that were taken under false pretenses." I felt a surge of satisfaction hearing those words. Ashley thought she'd been clever, but she'd actually been committing crimes. "What's my best strategy?" I asked. "Document everything, don't tip your hand, and when you're ready, we strike fast and hard. Don't give her time to hide assets or create counter-narratives. That afternoon, I implemented the third part of my plan, gathering real-time intelligence. I installed a GPS tracker on Ashley's car, a small device I ordered online that looked like part of the vehicle's undercarriage. I also set up software on our shared computer that would log her activities when I wasn't home. Within a week, the tracker revealed Ashley's true schedule. On days she claimed to be working, she was actually meeting Ryan at various locations around the city. Hotels, restaurants, shopping centers. They had an entire routine that I'd been unknowingly funding. The computer monitoring was even more revealing. Ashley spent hours on social media, posting carefully curated photos that made our marriage look perfect. But her private messages told a different story. She complained constantly about me to her friends, calling me boring, old, and pathetic. She made jokes about how easy it was to manipulate me, sharing strategies for extracting money. One message thread with Karen particularly stood out. Ashley, he's working overtime again this weekend. Sometimes I feel bad about how hard he works. Karen, don't. You deserve to be taken care of. Besides, he seems happy being useful. Ashley, true. And Ryan's planning something special for my birthday. I'll need to come up with a good story for why I need $1,500. Karen, medical emergency? Those always work. Ashley, perfect. Maybe some kind of scan or procedure. My birthday was in 2 weeks. I made a note in my file and waited. Sure enough, 10 days later, Ashley came to me looking worried. She'd been having some concerning symptoms, she said, and her doctor wanted her to get an MRI. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and she needed $1,500. I'm so scared, Dennis, she said, tears in her eyes. What if it's something serious? I held her while she cried, making soothing sounds and promising everything would be okay. Inside, I felt nothing but cold fury. She was using my love for her, my fear of losing her, to manipulate me into funding her lover's birthday surprise. Of course we'll get the MRI, I said. Your health is more important than anything. The relief on her face was genuine. Not because she was worried about her health, but because her performance had worked again. I gave her the money the next day, then used the GPS tracker to follow her activities. Instead of going to any medical facility, she met Ryan at an upscale jewelry store downtown. Through the window, I watched him help her select an expensive necklace. They kissed passionately in the parking lot before driving to a hotel. That evening, Ashley came home looking radiant. The MRI had gone well, she reported. The doctor said everything looked normal, but they'd have official results in a few days. She was so relieved, so grateful for my support. You're amazing, you know that? She said, kissing me softly. I don't know what I'd do without you. I kissed her back, playing the role of the devoted husband while mentally adding this interaction to my growing file of evidence. The fourth part of my plan was the most delicate, creating opportunities for Ashley to reveal herself. I started asking seemingly innocent questions about her activities, her friends, her work schedule. Nothing that would seem suspicious, but enough to get her talking. How's Monica doing? I'd ask randomly. Still struggling, Ashley would reply automatically, forgetting that Monica was actually doing well. What did you and Karen talk about at lunch yesterday? Oh, just girl stuff. Her divorce, work drama, you know how it is. But I'd checked her GPS that day, and she hadn't been anywhere near Karen. She'd been at Ryan's apartment. Each lie, each casual deception went into my file. I was building an ironclad case that would be impossible for her to deny or explain away. Meanwhile, I began preparing for my post-Ashley life. I started apartment hunting during my lunch breaks, looking for something small but comfortable that I could afford on my actual income. I researched what my expenses would be without Ashley's emergencies, and realized I could probably drop one or two of my jobs. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I wasn't constantly exhausted, where my money went toward my own needs and wants, where I wasn't being lied to every single day. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. I also began rebuilding relationships that Ashley had slowly pushed me away from. I called my brother Jake, who I hadn't spoken to in months because Ashley always seemed to have something more important for us to do when he invited us over. I started having lunch with my old friend Marcus from my previous job, someone Ashley had always found boring and negative. These conversations reminded me who I used to be before I became Ashley's personal ATM. I'd been confident, social, someone people enjoyed being around. Somewhere along the way, Ashley had convinced me that I was lucky to have her, that I should be grateful for her attention. But talking to people who actually valued me helped me remember my worth. The final piece of my preparation was psychological. I knew that when the time came to confront Ashley, she would pull out every manipulation tactic she'd perfected over the years. She'd cry, she'd apologize, she'd promise to change. She'd try to make me feel guilty for not trusting her. She might even threaten to leave me, thinking that would terrify me into backing down. I spent time mentally rehearsing these scenarios, preparing responses that would cut through her emotional manipulation. I practiced staying calm, staying focused on facts rather than feelings, staying committed to my decision regardless of what she said or did. By the end of the month, I was ready. I had evidence, legal counsel, financial protection, and most importantly, complete clarity about what Ashley really was. She'd spent years thinking she was married to a weak man who would never fight back, never question her, never stand up for himself. She was about to learn that the biggest mistake of her life was underestimating the man who'd been quietly watching, planning, and preparing for this moment. The doormat she'd been wiping her feet on was about to become the wall that ended her game forever. Ashley had no idea that her perfectly orchestrated deception was about to collapse, taking her comfortable life and her network of enablers down with it. The perfect moment came exactly 6 weeks after I'd overheard that devastating conversation. Ashley was planning another girls' night. The same group, the same routine, the same women who had laughed at me while I worked myself to exhaustion. But this time, I was going to give them something worth talking about. That morning, Ashley had come to me with her latest emergency. Her friend Melissa was in the hospital, she claimed, and needed someone to cover her rent while she was unable to work. $2,500 needed immediately. I know it's a lot, Ashley said, tears streaming down her face. But she's been such a good friend to me, Dennis. I can't just let her lose her apartment when she's fighting for her life. I held her while she cried, making all the right sympathetic sounds. Of course we'll help Melissa, I said. Family and friends come first. The relief in Ashley's eyes was immediate. She kissed me gratefully, promising she'd find a way to pay me back, swearing she'd never ask for money again unless it was a real emergency. But I'd already checked. Melissa wasn't in any hospital. In fact, according to her social media posts from that very morning, she was at a yoga class, complaining about the instructor's new routine. Ashley was planning to use my money for the spa weekend with Ryan that Melissa had accidentally mentioned weeks ago. I transferred the money to our joint account as requested, but I also made some transfers of my own. By afternoon, I had moved most of our savings to my private account, leaving just enough to cover legitimate household expenses. I also withdrew $5,000 in cash, money I'd earned through months of overtime, and secured it in my safety deposit box. Ashley spent the afternoon getting ready for her girls' night, humming happily as she did her hair and makeup. She was in an exceptionally good mood, probably thinking about how she'd fooled me once again, how she'd successfully extracted money for her romantic weekend. "Have fun tonight," I said as she prepared to leave. "You deserve a night out with your friends." "You're the best husband in the world," she said, kissing me goodbye. "I love you so much, Dennis." An hour after she left, I drove to Karen's house. I knew that's where they'd be meeting. Ashley had mentioned it casually, probably thinking I wasn't really listening. I parked across the street and waited until I could see all three women through the living room window, wine glasses in hand, settling in for their weekly session of destroying my reputation. Then I walked up to the front door and knocked. Karen answered, her face immediately shifting from relaxed to panicked when she saw me. "Dennis! What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Ashley," I said calmly. "It's important." We're having girls' night," Karen stammered. "Maybe you could call her tomorrow?" "It can't wait," I said, and I gently but firmly stepped past her into the house. Ashley was sitting on the couch next to Melissa, both of them frozen with wine glasses halfway to their lips. The look of pure terror on Ashley's face told me everything I needed to know about what they'd been discussing. "Dennis!" Ashley jumped up, trying to force a smile. "What's wrong? You look upset." "Sit down, Ashley," I said quietly. "All of you, please sit down." The three women exchanged glances, but they obeyed. I remained standing, looking down at them from a position of power for the first time in years. "I have some interesting news to share," I began, my voice steady and calm. "Today, Ashley came to me asking for $2,500 for Melissa's medical emergency. Apparently, Melissa is in the hospital and needs help with rent. Melissa's face went white. Ashley started to speak, but I held up a hand. But here's the fascinating thing, I continued. According to Melissa's Instagram, she was at yoga this morning. According to her Facebook, she went shopping this afternoon. Unless they've started offering yoga classes and retail therapy in hospital rooms, I'd say someone isn't telling the truth. The silence in the room was deafening. Ashley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Dennis, I can explain," she finally whispered. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said. "You're very good at explaining things, like how you explained that car transmission repair that never happened, or the dental work that turned into a Vegas weekend with Ryan, or your sister Monica's eviction notice that coincided remarkably well with her promotion at the hospital." Ashley's face crumbled. When did I find out? I finished for her. 6 weeks ago, the night you had your last girls' night here. The night you called me your personal doormat and bragged about how easy it was to manipulate me. Karen and Melissa looked like they wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. Ashley's tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different than her usual performance tears. These looked like genuine panic. "I've been very busy these past 6 weeks," I continued conversationally, "learning about your lunch dates with Ryan, your spa weekend plans, your complaints to your friends about how boring and pathetic your husband is. It's been quite educational." I pulled out my phone and started reading from Ashley's text messages. This is from 3 days ago. "Sometimes I think about leaving Dennis, but then I remember how useful he is. Ryan keeps saying I should divorce him and move in, but why would I give up my personal ATM?" Ashley let out a strangled sob. "Dennis, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that you married me for money and security, not love. I understand that you've been systematically stealing from me for years. I understand that you and your friends think I'm a pathetic fool who deserves to be used and mocked." I looked at Karen and Melissa. "I also understand that you've both been active participants in this fraud. You've helped create alibis, you've monitored my reactions to make sure I stayed in line, and you've treated my pain like entertainment." Karen tried to speak. "Dennis, we never meant for it to go this far. Didn't you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you all enjoyed every minute of it. You turned my marriage into a game, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules." Ashley suddenly dropped to her knees in front of me, grabbing my hands. "Dennis, please, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but I do love you. I can change. I promise I can change." I looked down at her, feeling nothing but cold detachment. "Stand up, Ashley." She scrambled to her feet, hope flickering in her eyes. "I want you to know that I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "I've documented everything, every lie, every theft, every betrayal. I have GPS records, bank statements, recorded conversations, and enough evidence to bury you in court." The hope died in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your game is over. Tomorrow morning, you'll find that our joint accounts have been frozen pending legal review. The credit cards you've been using have been canceled, and I've already moved out of our house." Ashley staggered backward. "You can't do this. I'm your wife." "No," I said firmly. "You're a stranger who's been living in my house and stealing my money. My wife died 6 weeks ago when I discovered who you really are." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Ashley? That spa weekend you're planning with Ryan? You might want to cancel it, unless he's planning to pay for it himself, which I somehow doubt." As I walked back to my truck, I could hear Ashley's sobs through the open window, along with Karen and Melissa's panicked voices trying to figure out what to do next. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt truly at peace. The drive to my new apartment took 20 minutes. It was a small one-bedroom place across town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No lies, no manipulation, no performance required. Just honest walls around an honest life. I poured myself a beer, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself in months because of our tight budget, and sat on my new couch. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Ashley, but I ignored them all. Tomorrow I would turn off the old phone and get a new number. Tonight I just wanted to enjoy the silence. For 8 years I had been living Ashley's version of my life, working myself to death to fund her double life while she laughed at me behind my back. But that man was gone now, buried under the weight of too much truth. The man sitting in this apartment was someone different. Someone who would never again confuse love with exploitation or devotion with doormat behavior. Ashley had created this situation by treating me like a fool. Now she would have to live with the consequences of underestimating the very man she'd spent years destroying. 6 months later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. Patricia Moss spread the documents across her mahogany desk, her expression satisfied as she pointed to each signature line. "The judge was very clear in his ruling," she said, organizing the papers into neat stacks. "Ashley is required to pay restitution of $43,000 for documented financial fraud. She has 5 years to pay it back with interest." $43,000. That was what Patricia and her forensic accountant had been able to prove Ashley had stolen from me over the past 4 years. The actual amount was probably higher, but we could only pursue what we could document with absolute certainty. "What if she can't pay?" I asked. Patricia smiled grimly. "Then her wages get garnished until every penny is recovered. She'll also be responsible for all legal fees, which adds another $12,000 to her debt." I thought about Ashley, now living in a studio apartment across town, working full-time at her insurance office for the first time in years. According to mutual acquaintances, she'd tried to move in with Ryan after I'd exposed everything, but he disappeared the moment her funding dried up. Apparently, their grand love affair hadn't survived the reality of him actually having to pay for dates. "She tried to contest the settlement one more time last week," Patricia continued. "Claimed she was the victim of emotional abuse, that you had manipulated her into the affair." I laughed, a sound that came easier these days. "How did that go?" "The judge reminded her that we have recordings of her calling you a doormat and bragging about manipulating you." He was not amused by her attempt to rewrite history. The recordings had been the key to everything. In our state, only one party needed to consent to recording conversations, so everything I'd captured on my phone during those final weeks was admissible in court. Ashley's own words had destroyed any sympathy she might have otherwise received. "What about her friends?" I asked. "Karen and Melissa? They're named as co-conspirators in the civil suit, but they've already settled out of court. Apparently, they decided $10,000 each was preferable to having their involvement become public record. That money had been satisfying to receive, but more satisfying was knowing that Ashley's entire support network had crumbled. When faced with actual consequences for their actions, her friends had abandoned her faster than Ryan had. Ashley was learning what it felt like to be truly alone, something I'd experienced for years while living in her house of lies. I signed the last document and pushed it back across the desk. "So it's really over?" "It's really over," Patricia confirmed. "You're a free man, Dennis." Walking out of that law office into the bright afternoon sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There had been court dates, depositions, and endless paperwork. Ashley had tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, from tearful apologies to angry threats to attempts at seduction. But I'd been prepared for all of it, and none of it had worked. The most pathetic moment had come 3 months ago, when Ashley had shown up at my apartment at 2 in the morning, drunk and sobbing. She'd begged me to take her back, promising she'd change, claiming she'd realized how much she truly loved me. But even through her tears, I could see the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done to me. She was sorry she'd been caught. "I made mistakes," she'd slurred, clinging to my doorframe. "But everyone makes mistakes, Dennis. You can't throw away 8 years of marriage over some mistakes." "You're right," I'd said calmly. "Everyone makes mistakes. But what you did wasn't a mistake, Ashley. It was a choice. Every lie, every theft, every moment you spent with Ryan while I worked myself to death, those were choices." She'd tried to push past me into the apartment, but I'd blocked her path. "We can work through this," she'd insisted. "We can go to counseling, start over, be better." "There is no we anymore," I'd told her. "You destroyed that when you turned our marriage into a fraud." The hardest part had been the well-meaning people who tried to convince me to forgive her. Ashley's mother had called repeatedly, begging me to give her daughter another chance. Even my own brother Jake had suggested that maybe I was being too harsh, that everyone deserved a second chance. But I'd learned something important during those lonely months of investigation. Forgiveness without consequences isn't mercy, it's enabling. Ashley hadn't just betrayed me once in a moment of weakness. She'd built her entire life around exploiting me. She'd turned my love into a weapon against me, and she'd felt no guilt about it whatsoever. Now, driving home from the lawyer's office, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I'd quit 3 of my 4 jobs and was working normal hours for the first time in years. My apartment was small but comfortable, and for the first time ever, every piece of furniture in it was something I'd chosen and paid for myself. I'd also started dating again, something that had terrified me at first. How do you trust someone new when your own wife spent years lying to your face? But Patricia had recommended a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in helping people recover from financial and emotional abuse. "You're not broken, Dennis," Dr. Chen had told me during one of our early sessions. "You're a caring person who was targeted by someone who exploited that caring nature. That's not a flaw in you. It's a flaw in her." The therapy had helped me understand that what Ashley had done to me was a form of abuse, just as damaging as physical violence but harder to recognize. She'd systematically undermined my sense of reality, convinced me that her problems were my responsibility, and isolated me from friends and family who might have helped me see the truth sooner. But I'd also learned something else. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The man who'd survived Ashley's manipulation, who'd gathered evidence while maintaining his cover, who'd built a legal case while pretending nothing had changed, that man was capable of anything. 3 weeks ago, I'd had my first real date in over 8 years. Her name was Linda, a nurse practitioner I'd met at a coffee shop near my apartment. She was divorced herself, with 2 teenage kids, and she understood what it meant to rebuild your life after betrayal. "I can always tell," she'd said over dinner, "when someone has been through real hardship. There's a kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you." We'd been taking things slowly, but I was hopeful. Not desperate, not grateful for any attention like I'd been with Ashley, but genuinely hopeful about building something real with someone who valued honesty as much as I did. My phone buzzed with a text message as I pulled into my apartment complex. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Ashley trying to contact me again despite the restraining order, but it was Linda, asking if I wanted to grab dinner tomorrow night. I smiled and typed back, "I'd love to." As I walked up to my apartment, I thought about the man I'd been a year ago, exhausted, defeated, working 4 jobs to fund someone else's happiness while convincing myself it was love. That man felt like a stranger to me now, someone I'd known briefly but had outgrown completely. Ashley had spent years trying to convince me that I was lucky to have her, that no one else would want a boring middle-aged man like me. But she'd been wrong about everything else, and she'd been wrong about that too. I was 59 years old, and I was just beginning to discover what I was actually worth. That evening, I called my brother Jake to tell him about the finalized divorce. We'd been talking regularly again, rebuilding the relationship that Ashley had slowly poisoned with her constant need for attention and drama. "How do you feel?" he asked after I'd given him the details. I considered the question seriously. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." "Any regrets?" I thought about Ashley, probably sitting in her studio apartment, facing 5 years of wage garnishment and the reality that her golden goose was never coming back. I thought about Karen and Melissa, who'd learned that enabling fraud came with a price tag. I thought about Ryan, who'd discovered that someone else's husband paying for your girlfriend's affection wasn't actually sustainable. "None," I said, and I meant it completely. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, a nice bottle I'd bought for no reason other than wanting to celebrate the simple fact of being alive and honest. I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a decade: peace. Ashley had taught me an important lesson, though probably not the one she'd intended. She'd shown me that I was capable of surviving betrayal, of fighting back when cornered, of rebuilding my life from nothing. She'd tried to make me believe I was weak, but she'd actually proven I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own bed, go to my one job, come home to my honest apartment, and maybe have dinner with a woman who saw me as a whole person rather than a wallet with legs. It was a simple life, but it was mine, built on truth rather than lies. For the first time since I was 59 years old, I was excited to see what came next.